Hello and welcome back to the Pokemon Trading Card Game special event in the lovely city of Utrecht, as you just saw on the screen there. My name is Ross Gilbert and I'm delighted to be joined by my old friend, the lovely Joe Bernard. How you doing, Joe?
I'm doing really good, Ross, thanks. It's been a while since we've been sat here together, so really cool to get the old band back together. I've been wandering some tables, seeing some of the action in the opening stages, so we're right in the thick of it now. I'm really happy to be here.
Did you see any Lugia while you were wandering around the tables?
Maybe one or two, yeah. A few mirror matches perhaps as well. It seems like that has been the most dominant force in the metagame, and let's face it, that's not going to change this weekend. There could be adaptations to decks. There are certainly other archetypes out there right now. I even saw some Eternatus Wheezing creeping around the tables, which is a little bit interesting, as opposed to some of the more sort of common decks in the game. But there's still going to be that smuttering. People are trying to target Lugia in certain instances, but of course that's still going to be the most popular deck today.
Yeah, I mean, there's some marvels out there. We saw a Durant doing suspiciously well in Oceania a few weeks ago. That was kind of interesting. You know, who can forget the, was it Radiant Jirachi played in Regigigas? That was an absolute treat to see. And, you know, there's things like we saw Stefan Ivanov, Sasui and Gudra, which I know isn't a particularly new or unusual deck, but it's not exactly the one we think about as the force in this metagame, and that seemed pretty strong in round one.
Yeah, very dominating matchup. I feel like Stefan is very happy to see Lost Zone box players. It feels like he's very adept at dealing with the decks that sort of do little bits of chip damage here and there. He's very good at wiping away that damage with the Hisuian Gudra V-Star power. It seems like an archetype that can really cause trouble to a ton of decks in the format, really strong into those, and then has like an okay time into Lugia. It has some tricks up its sleeve. It's going to reduce a ton of damage, forcing certain attackers into the active position for the Lugia players, and has Temple of Sinnoh to slow them down as well. Yeah,
that Temple of Sinnoh, we didn't see it used much in that first game. Although weirdly, I'm sitting there, I'm looking at the deck list, and I'm like, oh, he plays Temple of Sinnoh, but all we've got is Capture Energy in the Lost Box. That's not going to be too useful. And then we saw that pivotal turn where the Capture Energy went onto the Greninja before actually that realization of, oh no, I can't get that basic, but I've also locked myself out of being able to Mirage Gate and attack with Greninja. So that Temple of Sinnoh, it's one of those you play it for certain matchups, like the Lugia. You know, it's that stadium that makes all special energy just single colorless with no other effects. And actually, you get some cheeky little extra value here and there, which I always appreciate when we see that coming in.
It's great seeing tech cards be universal. You can see it working well against Regis, which is already a strong matchup for you. It's pretty much put into the deck intending to help your Lugia, but it ends up coming into play in so many more matchups, as you said.
Absolutely. Now, last weekend was a busy weekend for the Pokemon TCG. We had a couple of big tournaments. I think we're going to have a look back at Natal for a moment here. Of course, it was one of those tournaments where you might not be surprised to see Lugia was big. We saw William Azevedo there getting the win with Lugia Archeops going back home $5,000 richer. But I think that top 8 bracket kind of says it all.
That's a really good indication of how this format really feels. This is a very Lugia-focused format. It feels like the deck to beat if you're not playing it yourself. Seems like many players who chose to pilot it got a really solid top 8 finish or better. William's a very accomplished Brazilian player. He was able to even beat a world champion in the finals in a mirror match. So that just shows that William really has the chops to do well with this archetype. It feels like, as you can see, there are Lost Box players, there are Gudra decks, but ultimately they ended up all falling to Lugia as it was a mirror match in the finals.
Yeah, and we do see that a lot at the moment. You know, we've had this format for a while. It's very mature, and, you know, a lot of players have played around with a lot of different decks. I know you yourself have tested everything within an inch of its life, and, you know, really made that decision that actually there might be decks I prefer, and there might be decks that I think I have a good chance with, but I don't think that there's any secret at the moment that Lugia is the best deck. That is pretty much what we can say here. And, you know, Stefan Ivanov, one of the best players in the world, thinking, I think I've got a good chance of Gudra, but I think I've seen it said by some of the top players that, look, if you go into a tournament and you're actually trying to win right now, you'd better be playing Lugia.
Yeah, you give yourself a really good chance just by having access to some of the strongest effects in the game at that stage. And yeah, I think especially for Natal, where it's the Latin America region, there aren't that many tournaments. It feels like just taking a safe deck and giving yourself that best chance is a really good call. So not surprising we saw it so popular.
Absolutely, but that was not the only tournament we saw last weekend. There was Vancouver Regional Championships as well, so we can have a bit of a look back at that one, and we see it looking Well, a little bit similar. We see Ian Robb taking the win with Lugia Archeops going home $5,000 richer. And it's very similar, except the Sableye has turned into an Arceus Duraludon.
Yeah, Arceus Duraludon making that top 4 placement. And, of course, the inevitable Ian Robb getting his 5th regional win. That is absolutely absurd. One of the most accomplished North American players, and doing it with Lugia Archeops. I know he's jumped around different archetypes a little bit this season, but he's ultimately landed on what we presume is the best deck and really showing it off with a fantastic finish. I think he beat something silly like 11 mirror matches as well. So that shows that there's a lot of intricacy to that mirror where you can make your skill show.
Yeah, I mean, if you can win the mirror match in a format like this, where you've got one truly dominant deck, I do really think that is just absolutely, you know, just that is what's going to take you there, essentially. That is what's going to be the, you know, the big deciding factor. If you can win the mirror match when you've got this kind of deck, that is just absolutely huge.
Yeah, so we can also have a little bit of a look at the breakdown of how that top 8 played out as well, where we see the Goodra Lost Zone box doing pretty well. We saw the Arceus Duraludon. Zach Lesage is actually here at this tournament. He's made it all the way over from Canada to play in this tournament. That shows just how valuable these championship points are for certain players. And Zach is a very seasoned veteran. He's thinking he'll have a good time coming over playing the Arceus Duraludon that got him that top 4.
And I kind of love that opinion of kind of like, look, I just played in this format in a big tournament and got top 4. I really like my deck. It's the exact same format. You know, okay, fine. Canada's very close to a Canadian player. The Netherlands is very much not that close. But, yeah, we see Stefan Tobacco, a player who's been gone for a little while. Here's a nice little pop quiz for you, Joe. Do you know the connection that I have with Stefan Tobacco?
Oh, not one-to-one, no. Go on, tell us.
Worlds 2012, we were the 2 CNT players.
Go, of course.
In the last chance qualifier, we were... he had the better CNT, let's be clear. I kind of completely just dropped out of Worlds properly. He went all the way through to top 8. So he was very much a dominant CMT, but I'll always have that connection with Stefan, you know. Nice crisp high five, you know. We are the CMT people today.
There you go. Always get that throwback on there one way or another, Ross.
I'm going to mention it, Joe. It's going to happen.
Yeah, great to see him. Always still enjoying himself, having fun with the game and coming back and doing great. That's always a great thing to see.
Yeah, and a player who kind of went away for a little while, kind of coming back. And I do find that when the really good players take a break from the game and then come back, they rarely tend to miss a beat. They're just, you know, even though the format changes, you know, if you get the game, you get the game. And you said about Ian Robb with those regionals. I mean, we're not talking about, you know, back in the day. I've been to 5-round regional championships with a top 4 in the past. That is not where we are nowadays. You know, 526 is actually a comparatively small one nowadays.
For this season, that's really low, actually, yeah.
And, you know, being able to just win these tournaments with hundreds and hundreds of players over and over again, you know, there's no fluke going on here. You are just that gosh darn good at that stage.
Yeah, I think it definitely makes a big difference when you go into that second day of competition. There's just such a huge amount of players who are fantastic. They're all at a very high level. If they've got that record of 6-2-1 or better, they've made it to that second day of competition, you're guaranteed to have 5 or 6 rounds before you even make it to Top Cut, where you are playing against the very best.
Yeah, and that is what's really interesting about this day 2 situation. You've got 19 match points. That is a 6-2-1 or equivalent record, 3 for a win, 1 for a tie. And then you get into day 2 with 5 or 6 rounds, depending on the number of players that we actually see attending. And then you've got to try and get up to a top 8. And that makes it really interesting because the players that get through day 1 in the lower seeds have a much harder time. You know, they've got to go kind of 4-1 or 5-1 sometimes, the lower seeds, to have a chance of top 8.
Yeah.
That changes a lot of things when you get into that day 2 scenario.
And it's even creating a big debate among players in the community who are thinking, what's my goal here? Is my goal simply to make day 2 and give myself a chance to do well? Or do I want to actually not go for like an ID in the later stages and try and play it out, give yourself a chance to have an even better record going into that second day?
Absolutely. Now, I think we're going to take a quick look here at the prizes for special events. Of course, we are a special event here, not a regional. And you can see there are a lot of championship points on offer today and a lot of booster packs.
Yeah, and it hasn't deterred anyone from turning up to this tournament. It seems like championship points and boosters are the main draw for players coming to this event. We have over 800 masters, which is unheard of for a special event in Europe. And as you can see, those championship points are the difference. Everyone wants to make it to Yokohama. It's such a big prize, and I think this is a fantastic way to try and achieve a lot of those points and get yourself that little bit closer to Worlds.
Yeah, it is worth pointing out, I believe Masters in Europe, we're talking 250 150 championship points for an invite. So a win today would not get you all the way there, but of course a lot of the real top players here either have their invite or they're kind of 50 points away, 100 points away. So there's a lot of players here who are, you know, really eyeing up that top 8 at the end of day 2, and if they hit that top 8, hey, that's now I've got my invite secured. And there is that real kind of that breathe out of kind of like an exhale now. I've got my invite. Everybody wants to go to Yokohama, and there's a really good reason for it. So it's just kind of, you know, you need to have the invite. No one wants to just go to Yokohama. You can go to Yokohama anytime, Joe. You want to play in the World Championships, and that's what's important.
And with this huge, generous prize pool of championship points, just one good placement. You could not really be having that great of a season so far. You could have been struggling, and then it all changes straight away with, you know, a top 32 placement. It can get you right up in there in the mix, especially with EUIC on the horizon.
Yeah, that is going to be 3 weeks' time. That is going to be big. I think I heard on the old headset that the feature match next round is going to be Nico Alabas against Patrick Landis. Those are 2 good players,
That is
Joe.
a star-studded round 2, absolutely. Yeah, that's going to be a really, really tight game. We know Nico Alabas is an international champion and obviously well-known around Europe for having great placements, is part of the Limitless team of testing group players where some of the very best around Europe all get together and come up with decks, and very consistent performer over the last few years, so I'm really excited to see what he's brought to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. And Patrick Landis might not have won an international championship, but if you've been around the European scene for a while, you'll know Patrick. You'll have heard of the achievements. It's one of those players, you know, when we're looking, you know, for who to feature, who we're going to get on the stream. We're looking for players, especially in the early rounds. We're looking for, well, who do we know? Who's had success in the past? Who do we think has got a really good chance for this tournament? But then, of course, when we get into later rounds, it's who's a 5-0 that we're just not that familiar with, and that's exciting.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, having this sort of a showcase this early in the tournament isn't always going to happen, and it just landed on our laps. It's going to be an amazing showcase this early in the tournament. If you're one of the players, you can't feel too good about it. You know you're up for a real challenge early on, even after just 1 victory apiece. So, yeah, it's going to be one of those things where they have to bring their A game, and they can't be tired or anything like that. They need to really switch on now.
I was saying that to Alex in the previous round. Like, imagine you sit down at a tournament like this, like, oh, round 1, oh, yeah, you got Stefan Ivanov and you're on stream. You know, it's round 2, oh, you're playing Nico Alabas, get over to the stream table.
Yeah.
It's not really what you're looking for. We all, let's face it, we all want a couple of kind of good matchups. You know, you want those decks the decks you want to play against, like Stefan having Lost Box.
Right.
Stefan's like, I'm playing a Suin Gudra. I would love if we could just have a couple of Lost Box in the early rounds, kind of get my feet wet before you start throwing the real challenges at me. But how do we overcome challenges, Joe? We look at the keys to the matchup.
Yeah, we've got an absolutely great way of trying to have that little bucket list of what's going on here. It looks like Nico is actually going to be piloting the Arceus Duraludon archetype, which means he's going to be sort of setting the pace. He's going to be trying to set up Arceus V-Star and a couple Duraludon, force as much hit points onto the board as possible, and also use those healing cards. He has Hyper Potions in his deck list, and also some hand disruption cards like Marnie. If you can use these to disrupt the Lost Box player, you can sort of throw them off their game and give them less easy routes with Mirage Gate combos and whatnot to actually pull together high damage attacks. And that's really how you buy back turns against the Lost Box players.
Yeah, absolutely. For Lost Box, it's just kind of, you know, do your thing, get cards in the Lost Zone. But you'll notice it's those big cards, and that's what really sets these Lost Box lists apart from each other. Everyone knows you're going to be playing 4 Comfey, a couple of Sableye, a couple of Cramorant, things of that nature. What's kind of different here is where we end up with the big attackers. You know, are you playing your Radiant Charizard? Are you playing Dragonite? Are you playing, you know, the amazing Rare Rayquaza? There are a few different options that you've got, and a lot of the time nowadays we are seeing people really going towards that Dragonite, and I casted a bunch of games with this Lost Box. They never use Dragonite. I am dreaming of the day someone actually attacks with one, Joe.
Yeah, it should be a pretty decent card if it is being played by Patrick, so that's huge. It looks like he's not playing the Rayquaza. It looks like he's playing sort of a lower to the ground build where he has the Raikou, but also Zamazenta from Crown Zenith, actually one of the sort of key cards from this set, and it's normally a really good sort of revenge attacker, but it still has that sort of lower damage output range than something like a Rayquaza, so it's going to be a challenge for this matchup.
It is. There's Miltank in there as well, which you always love to see. Of course, one thing that's really interesting, you can kind of say say this for Lost Box as well as for Lugia, you're teching, and it's almost limitless, pun intended, because you've got the whole Mirage Gate to accelerate the energy, or in Lugia, you've got the Archeops to accelerate the special energy. So whereas before, you'd look at something like a Zamazenta with that attack cost for a couple of metal energy, and you'd go, yeah, that has to be a straight metal deck, and we're not playing it. Now, bit of Mirage Gate action, you're there.
Yeah, pretty much there's no limit to what could be played in the game right now, because we just have access to Archeops for the most crazy energy acceleration for special energy, and Mirage Gate if you encompass it in a Lost Zone package. All of these basic attackers have found their niches, found their ways into the game. I don't really feel like the Miltank tech from Patrick's going to come in too handy in this matchup, because Duraludon doesn't really care too much about that. It can get through all effects when need be. So it feels like it's going to be some heavy lifting from the Raikou and the Zamazenta here.
Yeah, and we are going down to our players, and here we got Nico Alabas on the left, we got Patrick Landis on the right, and this one is going to be, a very interesting game. And I know that's a bit of a cliche, but I think this is going to be a very interesting game. I like the Arc Duraludon, like you've said, the fact that Duraludon can go through so many different things. It's, the attack goes through effects on the defending Pokemon, which is lovely. But you've got so many different options. Like you say, Patrick's got the amazing rare Raikou, and you've got the Zamazenta. You've got that Greninja for maybe a bit of damage in the early game if you can get it rolling. You've got your Sableye for damage counters, your Cramorant to poke nice and early. And Nico's deck is way more straightforward. There are two Pokemon. You've got Arceus and Duraludon.
Yeah, that's what he's going to be using. He's going to be setting that pace. He also has those Lost Cities in his deck list as well. It's another way to really put pressure on Patrick. Even though you're just taking one prize a turn, you're stopping Patrick from recycling those threats. He normally plays quite low counts of all of his Pokemon, knowing that he can typically use Ordinary Rod to recycle these, try and once again use Mirage Gate combos and Raihan to re-establish them. But if they hit that Lost Zone, he can no longer access those Pokemon.
And once again, we've got that brilliant 2-free Duraludon VV Max list. But of course, that's so because you can take advantage of your Mustard there.
Yeah.
Just being able to get it from the discard straight onto the bench as a VMAX or any of that evolution malarkey. It's weird to see more VMAXs than Vs, but because you've got Mustard, can drag it out of the discard. This is one of the rare exceptions.
And I feel like if you're Nico, you've got to be happy seeing a Lost Zone box. I feel like this is one of your easier matchups for you. I feel like Arceus Duraludon is more towards that sort of 50-50 range in the format. It's not bad against anything in particular, but I think with the tech cards included, with those hyper potions, with those Lost Cities, you feel like Nico is going to be in the ascendancy going into this game. Let's see if Patrick can sort of throw a spanner into the works and make it more difficult for him.
And we were just talking about Zach Lesage making a top 4 finish with this deck at the Vancouver Regionals last weekend, and I don't think I'm giving the game away when I say I would expect Zach to be piloting this again.
He is.
It would be weird to make top 4 at a joint regional championship, travel all the way from Canada to the Netherlands, and then swap decks. That would be a bold move in this kind of format.
Yeah, can't betray the deck that got you here, and especially with that quick turnaround, just a week, it feels like it's great to stick with the tried and true. And we'll see if Nico can be picking up the pieces with Duraludon and see if he can have a similar fortune here, as we are going to see the opening coin flip, and Patrick is going to win that, and it looks like he's electing to go first here.
Yeah, I like going first with Lost Box. There's always that opportunity of going second and getting the turn 1 attack with Cramorant, but there's no guarantee. You need the double flower selecting and the Chorus's Experiment to pull that off. Not the end of the world, but we don't see it all the time. Going first, getting that early pressure, and obviously you know that Nico's turn 1 is not going to be great. It's going to be Arceus turn 1, Evolve turn 2, and then you start rolling. Maybe you do get the Arceus V accelerate some energy turn 1. That can be good, but again, there's no guarantee you get that going second.
Yeah, and of course, they don't know yet what they're up against, so it feels like the safest play just to go first, give yourself ideally a couple of additional flower selectings. If it can get you to 7 by turn 2, that's going to be a fantastic option for you. So it looks like our players are getting ready to set up their prize cards, and we're going to be getting straight into the action.
Yeah. Oh, we are looking at prize cards. Oh, that one amazing rare Raikou is there. That's about it, really, in terms of real notable cards, I think. There's one big Parasol, but...
Yeah, the big Parasol can be handy. It can, of course, be a way to shut down Sableye, but I think on reflection, it's not too bad for both players. Patrick actually doesn't play Hisuian Heavy Ball, so that's going to be a difficult card to fish out of prize cards. He has at least started with a Comfey, and also has the Radiant Greninja plus energy in hand. So we will see a few cards here to start the turn. Yeah,
that's not a bad turn 1. You're going to be getting a bunch of cards, because Nico started without Arceus. If we've got a double turbo energy in hand, that could actually make Nico going second being really, really profitable for him.
Yeah, a pretty nice flower selecting. Patrick's not been able to look through the deck yet, and he does play low counts of energy. So there's always a bit of a stress about, do I lost zone these early, not yet knowing if it's going to punish me later. But I think this is the right call, because the other option is quick ball, and that means he can continue to use Comfey here and get a few more selects in, because his hand is a ton of switch outs right now.
Yeah, and that's very good when you can get a few Comfey turn one. Like you say, 7 is a real number you're looking for to turn on that Mirage Gate. Maybe 10 for Sableye and, you know, start getting a bit cheeky, but
Interesting.
no.
Chooses to pass instead, rather than digging deeper into the deck. Maybe just wanting to get more information about Nico's list. He may be worried about using anything like Escape Rope if he is up against something like Flying Pikachu V Max. They become instantly really valuable resources. So Patrick trying to get a bit more information before deciding on, you know, what else I lost zone, etc.
Absolutely, and we see the rare Colress's Experiment not in a Lost Zone deck, which actually isn't that rare anymore.
No, it's finding its way in all sorts of archetypes, because it is just seeing 5 cards, and that's pretty valuable. And also, rather than discarding resources, lost zoning them can actually help an Arceus Duraludon player, because it means that some of their lower hit point V Pokemon can no longer be echoing horned back into play for easy prize cards. So Colress has found a really nice niche here.
Yeah, I mean, there's a kind of rule in the Pokemon TCG. We don't let you draw 4 unless you work for it. Draw 2 and flip a coin, and if it tends, draw 2 more. Draw 2 if there's a stadium in play, draw 2 more. Being able to see 5 cards without shuffling your hand into your deck or on the bottom of your deck or discarding it is huge. There will still be those times where you use it and you're forced into lost zoning something you don't want to, but most of the time you get away with it and you just see a bunch of cards.
And Nico is the picture of concentration right now. Looks like he's got some hard choices. Is electing to get rid of both a Pokegear and an Ultra Ball, which indicates he's got a very strong hand.
Oh, yes.
So has been able to pick up a few other pieces. I'm not sure if he has access to double turbo energy.
Not seeing it yet.
But he at least has another Ultra Ball, because it's likely that he wants to establish another basic this turn. Yeah, he's got an Ultra Ball in hand, lots of basic energy. It is going to be a basic energy attachment, so not quite firing on all cylinders. He does actually have license to pass over to Patrick. It's a little bit worrying, because Patrick could, in theory, get to 7. So Nico trying not to get caught short here and get a random, you know, Duraludon thrown into the active position. That's the sort of risk he's taking. He's saying, I don't want to get done by early escape ropes and have an awkward time, force my Starbirth to be switching outs. Instead, I'll say, Patrick, it's unlikely that you reach 7 this turn with only 1 Comfey on turn 1. I'm hoping this Arceus can hang on.
Yeah, he had the quick ball, but it's a very clear decision not to play, and I like your explanation there, because when there's only 1 bench Pokemon, Escape Rope just becomes as good as a boss's orders, which is not what you want. Patrick, we've got a flower selecting, it looks like here, and getting rid of an Escape Rope. And actually, one interesting thing you said about information, Nico gave very little away that turn.
Well, as soon as you see Metal Energy, I think you're assuming that it is Arceus Duraludon, and typically they don't play many other Pokemon, as you've said. It's normally just 2 attackers, so I think there's at least that inkling for Patrick now to start making some decisions. We are going to see the first Quick Ball. I believe he selected early on in the turn and got a second one, so we will at least see a bit of Comfey using that flower selecting, scoop up netting, flower selecting again. So the Lost Box deck is really an interesting one, because their hand can start quite small, and then they have so much reach. They still end up seeing so many cards via flower selecting. It really doesn't paint the whole picture, because he's going to still see so many more cards this turn.
It really is. He's also going to be able to get some cheeky damage with a Cramorant if he wants. I mean, it would be lovely to maybe try and extend a little further, like you say, with that Mirage Gate. There is a possibility here. No, I don't think he actually has anything that can KO an Arceus. Like, if he played Dragonite, then there would be that very low possibility of Mirage Gate, Dragonite KO. But I don't think he's got anything in the deck which can actually reach as far as... Now, Nico doesn't necessarily know this.
Right.
But we can sit here and go, you know what? I think that's actually pretty safe.
Yeah, it's pretty safe. I feel like there's not much of an issue here. The highest damage output Pokemon Patrick has is that Zamazenta, but it's when it's responding, it does more damage once one of your Pokemon has been knocked out on the previous turn. So Nico is actually pretty happy about this situation, all things considered, as Patrick's going to begin with that scoop up net and use a new Comfey here to see 2 additional cards. I believe that was a supporter in the mix. He has already got an energy in the discard pile, so he shouldn't worry too much about a lightning going. Yet he still has access to more of those, so shouldn't be too much of an issue. And we do still have plenty more selects to go. I believe there's also an Escape Rope in hand. There's even turn-attached retreat plays he can be making here, as he's working his way to at least the 4 threshold, which is what we need for that lost provisions from Cramorant. in order to attack and avoid the energy attack cost. So we can start pressurizing. And look at this, 2 Pokemon in the flower selecting. This is a nightmare situation for Patrick, because Nico is already playing that Lost City. So now you're just not going to have access to one of your Raikou, I would imagine. I feel like Zamazenta has to be higher value here.
You've got to imagine it would be, yeah. You called it there, Joe,
That's
and I agree with you
shame,
entirely. One thing that would have actually been pretty good this turn would have been a Raikou or a Greninja play to do 2 lots of damage, but of course there's no bench Pokemon, because Nico didn't bench anything, and that actually makes them really just inefficient plays at this point. So I think for Patrick, you are just going to end your turn spitting innocently. And we do see a discard of the Zamazenta here. Do we have any recovery?
Yeah, there's the ordinary rods, of course, but it's always awkward. I think Patrick's hand is just awkward. He has like Raihan, Gates, all these cards that are better for the sort of mid to late game stages. They've come up early, and it means you can't really discard them with these quick balls. They're too painful. So he's just going to have to get rid of a Zamazenta. He would have liked to also bench it this turn, I imagine, but instead he is going to immediately recycle the 2 energy and Pokemon with that ordinary rod. And I believe he will then be attached retreating into this cram for an attack here.
Yeah, see, that's awkward. When you're discarding Pokemon to use your cards, but then immediately ordinary rolling them back in, you're basically just saying, I had no other options. I've just wasted a bunch of resources, because that's what my hand forced me to do. I didn't really want to. And we see the 110 there going on to Arceus. That was not a bad turn 1 from Patrick.
Yeah, all things considered, not too shabby. And Nico, we know he has access to Ultra Ball, so there'll be at least access to Arceus V-Star. So no matter what, he's going to have a pretty good turn. It's really down to Nico to figure out if he wants to use some hand disruption this turn in the mix, or just focus on getting Duraludons established. He could also be doing a bit of hand counting to see if he can even weave in the single strike mustard. That's another play that he might have available to him, but I believe Nico has too many basic energy in his hand. So I think recycling those to the bottom is going to be the most important thing for him this turn.
That would be good. I mean, a mustard this turn would be absolutely awesome. But I mean, what you really need to get the Duraludon V so that you can then attach, you know, do 200 damage, take a KO, while you're then getting a bunch of energy onto your Duraludon and really kind of building up for that late game. That early Arceus often doesn't last. I mean, if you've got your big Parasol, you're probably going to want to try and get that on the Arceus at some point. On the your active at some point to protect the Arceus, because obviously Arceus now is potentially, you know, at a bit of, I mean, it would not quite, but there's, you know, some Sableye shenanigans that could come along there, and it's just the first Arceus often goes down, but you don't kind of really care as long as your Duraludon's up and rolling.
Yeah, Nico doing his first deck search. He has got one of his fighting energy prized, and I believe a couple in hand. So this might force him down that avenue of using a Marnie this turn. He might also be trying to weave in whether or not he can Starburst for Lost City and just get rid of this Cramorant for good. That would also be a really strong play here. I imagine Double Turbo is going to be one of his selections, and then probably just Marnie. But if he is able to weave in anything else here, we haven't yet seen his hand fully. He may be able to also guarantee that Lost City in the opening stages, which could be really handy to him.
Yeah, he plays 2 copies of the Lost City in his deck, so having one of them here wouldn't leave him out of it for the game, and I like that. I like being able to Lost Zone the easy attackers early doors before that Mirage Gate is rolling. I think you're right about Double Turbo Incent. It's kind of got to be that one.
Yeah.
And then we know there was an Ultra Ball in his hand last turn, so he's got access to the Duraludon at least.
The fact that Nico's shuffling might be an indication that he doesn't want to Ultra Ball here. He may have physical copies of some basic Pokemon in hand, or has another plan here. Could even be using Chorus as his supporter this turn. See what he gets. Yeah,
there we go.
With the lower hand size of Patrick, he said, I'm going to hold off on these Marnies until later. They can be more detrimental to my opponent. Instead, I'm just going to Chorus and see a few additional cards here before committing to the likes of my Ultra Ball.
And the good news is there is at least one Double Turbo there from the cards. I didn't see all of it, but I saw at least a Double Turbo. So he's definitely got the minimum here.
Starburst means you're going to have the minimum. He's going to have a good turn.
Oh, no, I think he's got the minimum without Starburst.
Right, exactly.
He can have the Duraludon and the Double Turbo and Starburst if he wishes.
Well, sad face, there goes the single strike mustard. It's not that influential in this matchup. He has the time to establish the basic V Pokemon a little bit more safely here. And also with that Arceus V hitting the Lost Zone, it's like we said, Nico's going to try and force the most amount of hit points for Patrick to get through. And that typically means it's going to be only one Arceus V-Star. And from there, it's going to be 2 Duraludon V-Max in the ideal situation. I'm a little bit surprised that we haven't seen, well, we're seeing the Evolution Incense get removed for the effect of Ultra Ball here, and he could have simply thinned an additional Arceus But it seems like that's the route that Nico wants to go for. Keep that door open for him if he needs to set up a late-game Arceus V-Star.
Yeah, sometimes that can be good in the late game. I mean, Arceus is a pretty efficient attacker as it goes, and it does accelerate a bunch of energy. We're largely playing it here for, you know, the Starbirth and that one energy acceleration in the early game. But, you know, late game, like you say, can end up being good. There's your double turbo, and we got the Duraludon. So everything's kind of looking pretty good here. I mean, you don't really need anything else here. I mean, unless you're going to kind of try and Duraludon and then get double V max next turn, but then you're opening up awkward kind of gusting plays potentially as well.
Yep, just the Trinity Nova then easily getting a knockout onto Cramorant, and Nico is going to be able to power up his Duraludon V here. We did see a discard of one fighting energy. I wonder if there's another one actually in the deck if he can fully power up this Duraludon V in a turn, ready for that VMAX. And no, it seems like the other fighting energy is in his hand.
Has to be.
So it's going to be 3 basic metal energy here.
Yeah, because we've got fighting energy in the discard. We can see there's one still in the prizes. So yeah, process of elimination. It's in his hand. A little bit awkward. But then again, next turn you attach, you evolve. And Nico's deck is kind of rolling like it wants to here. He's basically gone, right, well, I got my turn 2 Duraludon V with all the energy. And now it's over to Patrick like one turn. And this is where I think the Dragonite comes in so heavy in some of these decks. It's a lot to ask, but the Dragonite KO on, say, the Duraludon this turn would be absolutely huge. Patrick's got a slow, you know, a smaller damage output, a more reactive build of the deck, you could call it. So here, I suppose, it's going to be kind of a bit more poke damage. Maybe he starts softening up the Duraludon with a Sableye.
And look at this. Patrick has 3 of his Mirage Gates in hand. They're resources that you can't really get rid of, but he has no access to Chorus. So with a Raihan, you're still going to be a little bit shy of cards in the Lost Zone here. It will allow him to get an energy from the discard pile. He can also search his deck for any card. And I feel like he just has to take maybe a 3rd Comfey here to have access. Looks like he's eyeing up a Chorus for the following turn. You could even just grab another basic energy and give yourself a chance to use concealed cards here. But without Mirage Gate, he's having a very slow turn.
Yeah, because he's just not... There's nothing really to do here. It's kind of, you know, you can use Cramorant, but if you get the Cramorant, of course, it got KO'd. But even then, you're not actually... You 2-hit KO an Arceus V, but you don't 2-hit KO an Arceus V Star. So you're not really going to be taking a prize here. You've not got 7 cards in the Lost Zone. You're not establishing any kind of big threatening attackers on the board because you had to discard them, shuffle them back into your deck, so you're kind of hoping to find them later. And if I'm Nico here, I'm looking at Patrick's board and going like, you know what? I'm really all right with this. I'm not seeing much here that's scaring me at all.
And I think Patrick did just go for a basic energy, so it's so strange to go into your deck, find any one card and say, I just want 2 random ones instead. Hopefully these are better, because one card doesn't change enough for me here. I need to see more, and here is the concealed cards. Yeah, he does get another Comfey, so that's a little bit helpful at least. It now means he can retreat and Flower Select again. If he finds a pivot option, he could still be in with a way, and an easy select here, the VIP pass. Its time has passed. That can easily go into the bin here, but it looks like there aren't any other ways for Patrick to pivot, so it might be giving up a free turn to Nico here.
I think the other card he got off the Flower Selecting was just another Comfey there. So he's got plenty of Comfey, but no way to actually get them in the active and use them. And if you're giving up another prize, this is kind of like in the first game. You are supposed to be trying to take cheeky early prizes before the big thing that's really hard to KO comes out. If Nico's getting the cheeky early prizes and then bringing out the big hard to KO thing, that is not the way you really want this matchup to go. And by the time those Duraludon V Max come out, it's going to be, I suppose, get the Zamazenta down. At least you can give up the Comfey and get a good attack in return. But I think that's what you're doing, just setting up for next turn.
Yeah, and it's actually a big risk for Patrick to bench the Zamazenta before getting value, as he does pass over to Nico here, who's going to have a quick look into the discard pile. If Nico is able to Lost City and Boss's Orders the Zamazenta, it would be another huge resource being denied for Patrick, and that could be massive.
And there's only one in the deck.
Yeah. So then it's looking very rough, because again, Patrick's prize cards has 2 other of his attack attacking Pokemon. So he's in a really bad position if this Zamazenta doesn't get any value.
Yeah, Raikou, you got one in the lost zone, one in the prizes. So Raikou's out Cramorant. We've had one KO'd, and you have to try and recover it. There's one in the prizes, and Patrick's running out of attackers here. I mean, if Nico can get the Gust, even without the Lost City, this would still be amazing. But you're right, that Lost City would just be chef's kiss.
Yeah, here we go, boss's orders, and it's obviously the Zamazenta. Is it going to be the Lost City as well?
We had them both.
And you saw the response from Patrick there. He was like, yeah, that's really, really bad for me. And Nico will simply take a knockout here. It does help Patrick get to 7 in the Lost Zone.
I mean, that's silver lining
to attack with now. Nico elects not to accelerate any energy from his deck. There could be some arguments to going to a 5th energy. It then opens the door for you to Hyper Potion that little bit easier, but he's keeping some resources around as we do pass over back to Patrick here, who finally finds a Colress from this first flower selecting.
Yeah, and unfortunately here, really needed it last turn. This turn, I mean, Patrick just needs an attacker. He needs to start getting some damage on the board. And it needs to not really be a Cramorant or a Sableye, because neither of those
what else has he got?
Well, that's my point. That's what I'm getting at, Joe. He kind of needs it to not be the attackers he's got, because they're not good enough.
Yeah.
But they're the attackers he's got.
This is really rough for Patrick. A huge turn from Nico. Having the Lost City boss's orders plan is so scary. Patrick at least is at 10, so a Sableye is currently probably his best option. But where do you put this? You know that 120 damage can get wiped off the board immediately with just one Hyper Potion. Do you try and split up the threats here? How do you try and go about this?
I think you split it up. I think you put the Arceus into range of being KO'd by something else, and then put a little bit of chip damage on the Duraludon. Because you're right, that Super Potion or Hyper Potion is going to come and heal off all of that damage, and that's going to be awkward. What you really need, and I know it's too late, I'm aware of this, Joe, you really need the Zamazenta to get a KO on the Arceus. That would be a good play this turn.
Yeah, the big risk of actually quick ball for no target. That's really interesting from Patrick here to not even take. He had Galarian, Zigzagoon, and Sableye accessible from the deck, just choosing to take neither. That's a real surprise. I think the only thing that I would be thinking about if I'm Patrick is you know that you have some key Pokemon prized. Maybe just putting at least the Arceus into range of a second Lost Mine or into Spit Innocently for the following turn. That has to be a priority because you have to start taking some of these prizes just for some resources.
Yeah, or even maybe just try attacking with Greninja, because that's going to get you the most total damage on the board.
Does he have the right energy for Greninja? I'm not sure if he does. He has so many different energy in his deck list.
He doesn't play any water energy,
yeah.
You're right.
He's just trying to use bench damage via the Raikou.
Yeah, so no, Greninja isn't even an option. So you're right, it has to be Sableye then. That is the only one you can actually do. So that is not an idea. You have to see Raikou. This would be the turn for Raikou, getting 120 on each, kind of almost forcing Nico to waste a Hyper Potion.
Here we go. There is another Sableye. So Patrick perhaps did actually search out the Sableye in the end, debating twice about it, as we will see the retreats. We are at 10 cards in the Lost Zone, so Lost Mine is available to Patrick. I have to think he's putting the Arceus in range of another Lost Mine next turn, and I think you should put the remaining damage onto Duraludon.
Yeah, so that'd be 8 onto the active and 4 onto Duraludon, if my math serves me correctly.
Okay.
So we've got 160, so that's 110. It's still in range. It still works.
We're looking pretty good here. But if I'm Patrick, I'm also thinking about the timer right now. I'm thinking about the clock. I'm in a really bad position, and I know this matchup isn't necessarily the slowest, but also Nico can drag it out with some healing cards. It can go a large number of turns. I'd have to be thinking at this stage, with Lost Box being one of the slower archetypes in the game, how am I actually going to end up winning in a best-of-3 scenario if I keep this game going on while the doors are slowly shutting on me?
Yeah, and you know, with the way the format is at the moment, you need 6 wins and 1 tie in order to actually get yourself into day 2. So you can afford a tie, but firstly, you don't want to go in with 19 match points. You want more. And secondly, you don't want your tie to come round 2. You want to be saving that. Ideally, you end up at 6-2, and there's always that chance of having an ID to get into cut if that's what you're looking for. If the day 2 is, you know, really your goal. So yeah, you don't really want to be letting this carry on, because if we go too much longer here, the chance of Patrick winning 2 complete games and actually getting a win is going to be very low.
And can Nico weave together any healing here? He's going to use a poker gear, looking for yet more supporters. We haven't seen any Marnie from him yet either. That's normally something you try and do to disrupt Patrick, but he's just not had to at this stage.
There is one in the hand, in the cards if he wants it.
Yeah, this is the poker gear, right, I believe.
Yes.
So he has the option of either boss's orders, which I don't really feel is that important when there's already 2 Sableye established, and pretty much your goal at this stage with the stadium not being bounced is to continue to lost zone more and more Pokemon away from Patrick.
And I think I saw a boss's orders in his hand, actually, so I think he's good to go.
Oh, the big parasol as well. This is huge. It forces Patrick to also find an escape rope next turn so that he can actually use Lost Mine.
Yeah, of course, that big parasol, when attached to the active, prevents all of your Pokemon from those effects of attacks. It's kind of amazing. Prevents all effects attacks to your opponent's Pokemon done to all of your Pokemon. Think of it like a giant umbrella. You're opening up just
the full bench.
Yeah, your
protected.
whole bench and your active. It's one I get confused. I always think it protects Pokemon you attach it to because so many have in the past. But it's not. You open the umbrella, you protect everybody. And that means that now Sableye is no longer a viable attacker, and that's all Patrick has.
Even though Nico has 3 prize cards remaining, I think if I'm in Patrick's head right now, I'm thinking this is basically my last turn.
Yes.
If I can't deal with this Arceus, the game has gone too far away from me. I still have 6 prize cards to take. Nico simply has to announce an attack 3 times, and we know that's basically already available on the board. So Patrick really has to have a think about his resources here and see if he actually has a method of winning. We've already seen a few escape rope earlier on in the game. I know there's at least one in the Lost Zone. So this is a big flower selecting to see if he can get bailed out.
No.
Not too helpful. Manaphy and Battle VIP pass doesn't really change the situation at all here. But we will at least see a Colress. And I think if there is an escape rope, there is a reason to still be playing here. You can push the Parasol to the bench, and the Parasol has to be in the active position for it to be live and working. So it could be a way for you to at least take 2 prize cards, but you're still putting yourself in a really awkward situation.
Absolutely. So we saw a bunch go to the Lost Zone. We didn't actually see what Patrick took off of it.
There is an escape rope, so we can see a Lost Mine this turn. There will be prizes taken from Patrick. He's still in the game technically, so he's not going to give up just yet. And we will see, looks like a Cramorant is also coming down onto the board here for a Spit Innocently play, perhaps. If you're using the escape rope, though, I feel like you have to cash in on Lost Mine while you can.
You have to do that. You're going to put Sableye up, you KO the Arceus and drop, you know, I think it's a 1 damage counter or something somewhere else. But at least you take the prizes and you get the big Parasol off the board to open up Sableye plays in future turns if they stay out of the Lost Zone.
And I think because the escape rope is so late in the turn, Nico can quite confidently bring his VMAX into the active position because there's been so many actions from Patrick, knowing that Patrick is pretty much just going to target down the Arceus. And it looks like finally we see the Lost City bounced with the Temple of Sinnoh, and it will be all 12 counters to finish off this Arceus V-Star and take the first 2 prize cards. Patrick's going to get the bad news. No Pokemon being taken from those prize cards. They are still locked away where he cannot access them.
Not what you're looking for at all, but you do take 2 prizes. You get off snide in that regard, and you've at least got your Sableye, you've got your Cramorant, and it really, you know, if Nico can somehow whiff Hyper Potion for a couple of turns and doesn't get any of that healing, and you'll probably need at least 1 boss's orders because it's going to end up at the bench, there is a chance here you can chip away and take that KO. The problem is, Nico's working on the mythical 8 prize game here, because Patrick takes 3 prizes, goes down to 1 remaining. Nico can leave a 3 prize VMAX and be like, oh, you got 1 prize remaining, have fun carrying a 3 prize Pokemon.
And of course, there is one more thing that's a little bit awkward for Nico. He's got 1 fighting energy on board, 1 in the discard pile, 1 in the prize cards.
Yes.
So Nico's not to know that his next prize will be a fighting energy. He has to play as if 1 Duraludon has to take the next 3 prize cards. So where you're sitting from Nico, it's a little bit awkward, but that's enough for Patrick. He said, enough time has passed. I don't think I can get over the line. I've seen Nico start establishing that second VMAX. That is too much for me. I have to go on to the next game and hope for a better start.
Absolutely. Congratulations, Nico, winning that game 1. And of course, and we know it didn't in the end, but had that fighting energy been in that final position, that actually would have made it a very awkward game for Nico. And that could have given Patrick the win. Now, we know it wasn't, but I think for Patrick, there might have been a bit of of a sigh of a relief there, going, I didn't know what that fighting energy was, and I didn't have another attacker ready.
Yeah, and relying on Raihan as really your only way to bring back those energy aren't really easy to time. If he didn't have a Raihan in hand at that stage, it meant that, yeah, he was really just hoping to take fighting energy from those prize cards. He wasn't to know where they were, so, yeah, I feel like that was a well-executed game from Nico. Utilized his Lost City very well, used Big Parasol in the perfect time as well. For Patrick, had some awkward prize cards, so hopefully he has a better time of it in that next game.
Yeah, and we need to see these Lost Box. They want the first couple of turns. You want the explosive first. You are supposed to have the faster start here. You are supposed to have, you know, the turn 1 going second, turn 2 if you're going first, bit innocently getting that 110 on the board. Turn or 2 later, you're dropping all these damage counts with Sableye. Your goal here is to get damage on the board and maybe a cheeky KO before your opponent establishes the Duraludon VMAX. That's what you really need in this matchup. If your opponent gets the VMAX rolling before you've started taking prizes, that makes everything just infinitely more difficult.
And this is when you see how punishing the Lost Zone mechanic actually is. Patrick was constantly seeing cards that he needs for the mid to late game. He didn't even want them now, but you can't get rid of them for good. You have to take them. And it just meant that he didn't have access to Battle VIP Pass, was really lacking on switching outs. It just made the whole deck seem kind of clunky at times. And of course, it meant that he, you know, had his Pokemon picked off via that Lost City. We already see Nico's prize cards, nothing too worrying. Patrick still really taking a breath, taking a moment to think his way through the game and his game plan, because he's got to change things up if his fortunes are going to change here before we see his prize cards. And again, Hisuian Heavy Ball is typically a pretty standard inclusion in Lost Zone box, and it's really hurt Patrick in this first game to not see it here.
Yeah, you're playing a lot of one-offs. You know, you got 1 Greninja, 1 Miltank, 1 Zamazenta, and then you got 2 Raikou, and, you know, 2 Cramorant and 2 Sableye. You're really running thin on these Pokemon, and they're all basic. So being able to use the Hisuian Heavy Ball to get any one of those out of the prizes, because the chances
again.
That Raikou does not want to come out of the prizes, Joe.
And a handful of basic energy. This is really awkward.
2 Psychic.
Yeah, and I believe it's only a couple grass as well.
It's 3 grass.
3 grass, all right.
But the one of the 2 Psychic is big for Sableye, but it is hopefully going to come out fairly early.
At the very least, we have a very good hand. Lots of energy in Patrick's hand. Starts off with the concealed cards from Greninja and can finally use Battle VIP Pass. Can have a look through the deck to see what Pokemon he has access to, but undoubtedly, as straight away he's put the comp phase to the active position. We once again need to start using that flower selecting from the get-go. Start fueling up that Lost Zone.
Yeah, no mucking about. You can't attack turn 1. Don't bother about attackers. Get the Comfey out and just make sure you're getting all those cards in the Lost Zone. I mean, the ideal situation is if you can maybe get a couple here, then next turn you got your Corvus's Experiment, maybe with a bit more draw power, you get to 3, and then that's your 3 flower selecting, and that's how you get 7 turn 2. And again, it's a lot to ask, but we've both seen it happen many times. If you get like a turn 2 Amazing Rare Raikou doing 120 to the active, 120 to the bench, that is the kind of thing that changes the game quickly. That's
the swinging tempo that this deck is looking to achieve for certain. So Patrick will kick things off with the double Comfey. Has plenty of energy to retreat. I don't know if he has many other physical switch outs in his hand, so we'll see how that plays out. Possibly he's looking to find it from this flower selecting. No, he actually has the early scoop up nets. It also means he could use another concealed cards here as well to see even more, and we do see it straight away. Always important to use the concealed cards first. If you know you're happy putting energy into the discard pile, you give yourself more information before you use that flower selecting. So really nice sequencing from Patrick here.
Absolutely. We do see the escape rope going, which we talked about last game is not one you really want to see there. We see another energy going, so just a manual retreat so we can get another flower selecting. And this is 2 turn 1 with the, you know, fairly limited draw power, no supporters. Not too bad. And a Cramorant down. This is already a better start than game 1.
Yeah, you've got to be happy with how that's gone as we finally pass it over to Nico, who's also started with his best lead here, the Arceus V. That's another reason why there's only 2 Duraludon V in the deck list, so that you start with this Arceus that little bit more. And it looks like he's eyeing up a few options here. I can't see much out of his hand, but at least there's a quick ball. And I believe there's only basic energy in the hand right now, so I'm not seeing a Trinity Charge option, unfortunately.
No. That's what I'm kind of train my head and have a little bit of a look for, but no, it looks like Trinity Charge is out for the moment. But at least you got yourself a quick ball if you want to get that other Pokemon. And you've just actually seen an escape rope go to the Lost Zone, so you know that those options are going to be a bit fewer. You know, Patrick's not going to want to be wasting them unless he absolutely has to. And already we see the basic energy.
At this stage, stage, Nico has seen a good amount of Patrick's deck from game one, and I think nothing scary, you know, nothing that can knock out an Arceus V turn one. So Nico could be thinking once again that he's pretty safe to leave it here on its own. So again, looks like he's just going to pass here. It doesn't look that flashy, but no matter what, he's looking to use that turn 2 Trinity Nova, so he may as well just pass things over, and it denies Patrick from once again getting to that 7 in the lost zone and using that Raikou to great effect.
Yeah, and obviously we saw the Raikou game one, we saw that end up in the lost zone, so Nico absolutely knows that's an option, and you don't want to take that much damage, you know, turn one, it's not always going to happen, but just don't leave yourself open to it. Here we see Chorus's experiment from Patrick, absolutely the supporter you want to see. And we got ourselves quick balls, and there's a few options there.
Could be both quick ball going, honestly. He found the Zamazenta. It looks like the boss's orders might be going as well.
Yeah.
Nico's deck is one that really tries to keep a really low bench size. So typically, whatever's in the active position is the thing you're trying to hit quite often. So it makes sense to see the boss's orders hit the lost zone here. To get to number 4, let's see if Patrick can do much else. We at least see a turn attachment to the Raikou, making it hopefully a little bit easier for him to weave in an attack. Now it's a difficult choice. It's the Mirage Gate having to hit the lost zone in order to have a bounce to that lost city. A lot of respect being given to that stadium makes sense for Patrick here, but it is still a painful lost zone.
And Patrick is playing one stadium total.
Yeah,
literally
exactly.
one
he
in the
has
entire
to bounce it at least once. We do at least see the switch carts here, and then into the spit innocently from Cramorant. And kicking things off for Nico here. Let's see how the hand actually looks. I didn't see access to V-Star, but it could be something that he's looking to draw into. If it's not coming together, he at least has Quick Ball, so he could Trinity Charge to another Arceus. But this could... never
he's
mind.
Got it in hand, Joe. He's got it in hand.
V-Star. It's going to be a much better turn then.
I mean, generally, being able to search any 2 cards will give you a better turn. I agree with that. Oh, here we go. So we got ourselves a quick ball coming down, getting rid of a right hand. You're not on the comeback trail here. And once again, Nico is able to kind of do what he wants to do, and because of the way Patrick's deck is built, there's not really anything that can comfortably 2-hit KO an Arceus V-Star, which means that Nico's going to get the Duraludon. We're going to see Nico take the first KO, accelerate energy onto the Duraludon, just like in game 1, and then probably survive a hit.
Yeah. And it's going to be massive. Even if Patrick is able to use that Raikou, sort of split up the damage, we know that Nico can alleviate that pressure with those hyper potions. So he's really in a good position. The way Nico has built his deck list is making it pretty good into this matchup, as Patrick now has to watch as another Duraludon V is established. We are seeing a shuffle from Nico before the Starbirth here, which might indicate it's going to be either a Colress or a Marnie first.
Quite possibly here. And you say the healing there is going to be huge. Of course, Raikou does 120, Hyper Potion heals 120.
Yeah.
And you've got to think that's what Patrick is planning for next turn. That is the most amount of damage you can get onto the board. And there's no Lost City out yet. So at least there's a chance that Nico has to actually KO it rather than, you know, getting rid of it for good.
And here we go, Amani. Patrick got 2 concealed cards in and some Flower Select, so actually had pretty sizable hand size. Nico's going to deny that and try and put him down to just 4 cards. He gets to see an additional 5. If it helps him out and gets him towards double turbo energy or a few other helpful pieces, that's great. But he always has that fallback of Starbirth to see him through and make sure he's having that perfect turn.
Yeah, Starbirth was interesting to me when we first saw it. I thought there might be kind of a split of players, people who used it straight away to set up, other players who used it for those late game casts to guarantee victory. But it's very clear after a whole bunch of testing, no, it is a turn. You use it, you get it, you use it. You're not saving it for the late game or any of that. This is very much a card which is used to set up. And it's always going to be the end of your turn because you want to see what you can get naturally, and then it's the last couple of pieces with this and you're off. You do see those very rare games where you magic everything and you're like, okay, fine, I'll save it for later. But it's very much an early game thing here.
Even if it means that Nico can search out the Lost City, it seems valuable enough. And once again, putting the pressure on as quickly as possible.
And the big parasol.
And the big parasol to boot. And it's going to force the lost zone of the Cramorant as Nico can initiate the prize race once again whilst powering up the Duraludon V on the bench. A picturesque turn for Nico, and it's back over to Patrick to see how he can respond to this.
I mean, that's just mean. Getting the KO with the Lost City and the big parasol while you get your Duraludon built up. I mean, that's just everything in one go. That was absolutely huge. We see Chorus coming down from Patrick here, and I think at this stage with a big parasol out, you have to go Raiko and just hope that that spread of damage is going to end up being relevant in the future.
Seems like definitely the play. Some easy VIP pass decisions, at least for Patrick. That's something going his way right now. But as we know, the Marnie put the counter stadium to the bottom of his deck as well.
Oh, yes,
let's not forget. So it's likely that the Lost City is sticking around, which is a nightmare situation for Patrick. And another tough Flower selecting. The Raihan is going to have to hit the dust here as he carries on protecting his Mirage Gates. There's one in the prize cards, already one in the Lost Zone, so he can't afford to get rid of any of those. A quick check of his discard pile might force Patrick to use an Ordinary Rod before using a Mirage Gate here, because there are, I believe, at least one Lightning, possibly even two Lightning Energy in the discard pile. So if he is able to formulate a Raiko attack, it would require some energy recovery first here.
Yeah, and that's just awkward. It's just awkward on awkward. Like, it's already not going great. Your opponent's had a great start, and it's not a great matchup, and you've had awkward prizes, and now you've got to go through all these extra steps just to try and get an attack off. And, you know, we've got 15 minutes left of round 2. We're not going to be getting a real game 3 here. I think that's fair to say. Patrick, at this stage, is really just trying to win game 2 and go for that tie. And even that, at this stage, is starting to look like a pretty tall order.
Patrick really debating what to grab here. He does have the required energy to use the Raiko without the need of Ordinary Rod, just a little check through there. He does have access to Lightning and Metal Energy in the deck. And I believe he took a Galarian Zigzagoon. We are still going to see an Ordinary Rod here. Typically, these are cards you try and wait around on to recover Pokemon, but we know that Nico's got other plans and won't allow those to come back. And Patrick just going to save us a step here as he will Mirage Gate immediately before shuffling up, as the Raiko is finally going to get into the mix here. Deal a good amount of damage into this Arceus V-Star, but also you get a little bonus 90 damage onto the Duraludon, because, of course, Duraludon does have the ability protecting it, that little hard coat, helping it out there.
Yeah, that is why we play. That's one of the main reasons we play this particular Duraludon, get that little bit of extra protection. So yeah, that's going to help him out very nicely indeed. And it's just, I'm looking at Patrick's board here, and it's just, you're not doing enough damage. There's not one of those big hitters where you can kind of come up with that big surprise, you know, do a little bit of chip and then come out with that big KO. Other than the Zamazenta.
We see at least an escape rope here. That's a little bit helpful. You like to keep an eye on these so you can play around the Parasol that's on the board, but also Patrick wants to deny a second Duraludon being powered up by the Arceus if he can help it. So you're still getting the same amount of damage on the board, but you're making life a little bit less easy for Nico, because Nico ideally wants the Arceus to go down first once it's done its job. It wants to get a second Duraludon powered up, and Patrick is saying, you know what, Nico, you have to find your VMAX naturally here and start turn attaching towards your next VMAX if you want to use both of them. And that's a lot more difficult, because when you commit turn attachments, it means then you no longer have the access to Hyper Potion.
Yeah, and slowing the game down, of course, means that your little chip damage, which is not as much with your Raiko spreading and your 110 from Cramorant, your 10 from Sableye, all of a sudden that starts to add up because you have those extra turns while your opponent's being a little bit slower. So I like this from Patrick, and there won't be any concession here. We're in game 2. It's not unless it's completely, definitely hopeless. We do see the VMAX coming in here. I mean, there's not much switching in Nico's deck. There's like an escape rope. Yeah,
one switch, one escape rope. That's all he plays. That's pretty much the standard procedure here, because you, again, typically just play such a low bench. As we can see, Nico's basically had 2 Pokemon in play for both games so far, and that's really all he needs. He may eventually start working towards using a third, but he may also want to commit turn attachments to, again, helping him Hyper Potion throughout the game. So even though Nico's in a commanding position, he still has decisions to make here, as you can see, really taking his time, but ultimately will choose to simply remove this Raikou from play with the Lost City still in effect and another prize card going his way.
And now Raiko, of course, is completely off the board. We've got 1 in the prizes, 1 in the Lost Zone. They are the 2. So, I mean, this seems like a good time for Zamazenta, because honestly, what else really is there? Oh, I suppose Sableye. Sableye to KO the Arceus while dropping damage counters would be quite nice. Then maybe work up to the Zamazenta the following turn. So that could certainly be one way to go.
It's another tough break for Patrick. He's selected into Colress and the 1 Psychic Energy he has access to, because there's a Psychic Energy in the prize cards.
He's got to take the Psychic Energy.
Well, can he get the Sableye into the active? we don't know what's in hand. Can he actually
if he doesn't have a
utilize
pivot
this?
in the active,
Yeah.
that just means no attack regardless.
He had the plan for Lost Mine here, whilst the big Parasol is on the bench, and Patrick now is in an awful position. Do you have to commit Mirage Gate just to retreat a Comfey here? Oh my goodness, it's the Chorus having to go. It's a tough break for Patrick.
It has to be the Chorus.
Yeah.
You just really don't want it to be the Chorus.
Oh, look at this. Psych Energy actually hitting the discard pile because you're committing to Mirage Gate already, perhaps. Well, you can pay retreat into Cramorant here instead. That would be your other option. We at least do see Temple of Sinnoh in hand.
Yeah.
So we're going to stop that at least. But it's still another suboptimal turn for Patrick here, thanks to some awful flower selecting. It's not helped him too much.
I think he is probably going to go Cramorant here. That does seem to be the way we're going, because you'd have to get that Psych Energy back into the deck just in order to then Mirage Gate it, which is just a lot of combo pieces you don't need. The problem here is you're not dealing with the Arceus. So if Nico was able to, you know, potentially get the Arceus up, then next turn that would turn off the potential. You know, if you get the Arceus to KO the Cramorant, then all of a sudden Cramorant's gone, and you can't use Sableye next turn because Big Parasol's on the active, and then Patrick's back in that position where there's just no real attackers coming out.
Patrick now going to quick ball away the Manaphy, which we know isn't all that helpful, is going to try and grab the Zamazenta. I wonder if he'll bench it this time around, because we know he can at least bounce Stadium and then make it difficult for Nico, but we saw how punishing it was to bench it proactively, so it might just be something coming into the hand, absolutely, and it will be a spit innocently from Cramorant, continuing to pressurize the Duraludon VMAX of Nico here.
Absolutely. That Duraludon is not in Sableye range, it must be pointed out. I believe we've got 200 damage on there in total.
Yep.
So you're not quite going to get that with Sableye. So, again, that's another one that's just kind of, it's still awkwardly out of reach. So you don't even really need to Hyper Potion this turn. You've still got a bit of time for that.
Well, Patrick actually is holding the sneaky Galarian Zigzagoon, which can put him into range. So that could be something that Patrick's eyed up. That's why he's content with the Spit Innocently this turn, and still chose to use the Psychic Energy, but used it with the concealed cards, knowing he can recycle the Psychic Energy later. And Nico now, is he in the position where he needs to start developing his next attacker? He's putting Patrick on a 4-turn clock right now. And is it time to start weaving in some additional Pokemon? The fact that he's discarding an Arceus V tells me it's Duraludon instead here.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that needs to be the one you're weaving in. I mean, the ideal situation here is KO with the Arceus to accelerate energy onto a new Duraludon. That's what you want to be doing here. The question is, does he have the Duraludon and does he have the switching card? Because all he really needs.
Yeah, and also, to be fair, with the Temple of Sinnoh in play, you may even be forced to turn attach to your Arceus once again, which makes it a little bit more awkward.
Good shout.
So we'll see how the Pokegear treats Nico. Is he once again going to continue to Marnie the opponent, knowing that Patrick is holding a Zamazenta? That could be one of his priorities now, to try and deny Patrick from one of his key attackers. I didn't quite see what was selected from the Pokegear, so I'm not sure if we're going to be seeing a Colress or a Marnie, but those seem like his best options at this stage.
I like Marnie, especially after you saw your opponent search out the Zamazenta and not bench it. Kind of, hey, last game you benched it and I punished you for it. This turn you didn't bench it and I punished you for it. That's just mean, frankly.
It's one of those things where you want to thin your deck as Patrick. It makes sense to do it, but yeah, it means that you can fall prey to hand disruption. Nico really taking his time, though, on all of his decisions. The second Duraludon has hit the board, which tells me it's likely turn attachment is being committed to that Pokemon rather than trying to heal up your Duraludon. I think the Temple of Sinnoh is actually low-key helping Patrick here because, as we said, we've seen double Turbo Energy in Nico's hand as well, and it also denies the retreat play using the Arceus. Nico once again taking his time here to see what's in the discard pile, what's in the lost zone, as it's being fanned out quite nicely here. We have a great display of what attackers have already gone. There's a Raikou in there, there's a Cramorant. Boss's Orders also a card that's typically a 1 copy. And it is actually going to be a Boss's Orders from from Nico here, bringing Patrick's Sableye into the active position.
I was thinking about this. I mean, it's a better play with Lost City, of course. Yeah. But you know your opponent's kind of lost their Psychic Energy, or you suspect, you know that you had to get rid of one and we didn't see an attachment, and last turn would have been a great turn to use it if you had it. So then you know we don't have the energy. Now you know he doesn't have the Sableye, and it's, even without the Lost City, you've just essentially going, well, I know you're clearly struggling for attackers, let me just annoy your attackers. So that was nice.
I think it's a big pickup of Raihan from this flower selecting, but I'm not sure, again, if it does enough. It may just force Patrick once again into a spit innocently, and then you're hoping to string together scoop up net Zigzagoon plays to finish off this Duraludon. But again, it could be another thing that can fall prey to Hyper Potion. I'm just not sure if Patrick has any better options in this moment. He just has a lot of Pokemon in his hand and not much else.
No, unfortunately not. I mean, Zamazenta here, but you would still need the Zigzagoon to get the KO. I mean, it looks like we're... Is that an attachment with Raihan to the Comfey just to retreat? It's not the ideal scenario, frankly.
No, the Marnie has done Patrick pretty dirty. We will see the retreat into Cramorant. I believe he picked up the scoop-up net from the Raihan here, so I think he is looking to use a couple headbutt tantrums to reach the 130 this turn.
Yeah, if he can get it all this turn, that would be lovely. Now, I think we need 3, if my maths is correct. I think it's 200 on there, 340 on... Is it 340 on Duraludon?
It's 330 on the Duraludon. So we're there. We are ticking over with a double headbutt into the Spit Innocently. 3 prize cards for Patrick. Once again, he's getting the bad news that he can't access Raikou, but at least some much-needed cards here. He's now got access to Mirage Gate again and a few more things to work with for next turn.
But we're back where we were in game 1. Like, yeah, you took 3 prizes. That's awesome. And yeah, that Arceus is close to going down. But you're not going to win the game unless you also then take out the fresh Duraludon VMAX.
Yeah, you've taken 3, you still need to take 5. That's pretty much how Nico is going to try and make it play out, which is really rough when Nico is halfway through the game and is continuing to tick that clock down. He'll once again be able to attack with Arceus and again power up the Duraludon on the bench. It's down to Nico to see if he can A, bounce Stadium, or B, commit a turn attachment to his Arceus V-Star in the active position with the Temple of Sinnoh currently in effect. And the Chorus is going to be pretty easy choices here. The Choice Belt obviously not too useful. Nico hasn't seen anything like a Dragonite, which would be the only time where you'd think differently about it. And also an Evolution Incense is hitting that lost zone for him. And we'll see if there's any other key actions. We are going to see another VMAX hit the board. That's another big tick off his list. You don't have many actions with Arceus Duraludon, but all of them are crucial decisions to make.
There's the energy. Although it is a fighting energy, which there's not a huge amount of those. There's 3 in them in the deck, and we know at least 1's gone.
Yeah, I think that means he's going to get the 3rd out of the deck, as well as whatever metal energy he can also pull. And he's just going down to 2 prize cards remaining. And again, there's just a lot of hit points to get through. Only 1 metal energy, only 1 fighting energy. That's at least good news for Patrick. We'll see if that's going to be influential here. Patrick has to play around, of course. Don't forget there is a big Parasol also on this Arceus V-Star. It does shut off some of Patrick's attacking options. He's probably going to have to weave in a Mirage Gate play.
Yeah, that Sableye not going to do very much. We need a Cramorant would finally be able to get the KO here if there was a Cramorant available. We see there's one in the discard there, so I think we need to kind of get that back into the deck to use it, which is a bit awkward, frankly. But I think that's about the best you can do, or... Yeah, that's about it, to be honest with you. Sableye's not doing you very much. Raikou's gone.
Yeah. I see Mirage Gate, I see basic metal energy in hand and Ornery Rod, so there's no doubt Patrick can power up Zamazenta. I'm just not sure if he can get it into the active position yet, because once again, he's found it difficult to pivot his comp phase. I think it's down to this flower selecting here. We finally see a scoop up net, but it's alongside Sableye.
Oh, no! Oh, and even
like
then,
this.
you're using Zamazenta's Revenge to basically do 40 damage.
Yeah.
Which is not what you're looking to do.
Oh, it's so rough for Patrick. He's had a really tough time of things with these comp phase.
It's not been going his way. Like, it's not, like you said at the beginning, it's not a great matchup for him just to begin with. And then you build in the awkward flower selecting and all of that, and it's just not, it's not his game here. It really isn't. Here we do see the Ordinary Rod that can at least get some stuff back, but Sableye's now in a lost zone. Are there any Sableye left? Is there 1 left?
Yeah, there was 1 left, because there was 1 knocked out whilst the Temple of Sinnoh was still around.
That's what I was thinking. Okay, that's good. So there is at least still a Sableye available. I was hoping there was. So, but again, it's no good this turn.
No, again, it is going to be a Zamazenta turn. He has got Mirage Gate access, so part of this Ordinary Rod was just to get Metal Energy back into the deck for him. So there's going to be a Lightning Metal. He has a Metal Energy to attach, and he has Scoop Up Net, so he will simply be retaliating with Zamazenta here. But you're really just crossing your fingers that the Duraludon VMAX can't attack next turn, because it feels like you're committing so many resources to a heavily damaged Pokemon.
Yeah, you really are. This is a perfect spit innocently. Basic Pokemon, 0 energy, go get a KO. That's not an option. So now you've got 3 energy on a basic Pokemon. And if you can survive next turn, you can get this back to the bench, then start using stuff like Sableye, and you're in a much better position. If Nico finds a second Metal Energy to go onto the Duraludon VMAX, he will get a straight KO on the Zamazenta, go down to 1 prize remaining, at which point Patrick... You know, and Patrick might also be at 1 prize remaining, but that's a very different 1 prize remaining. He's got it in his hand. Oh, and I think that might be about enough to sew up this game here. We know Nico's got the KO, and honestly, the only thing you're doing here is maybe boss's orders, but definitely not this turn. And, you know, maybe working towards a Hyper Potion play in a couple of turns' time, and that's really it. You are set up well here, because Patrick just does not have, especially when the Zamazenta goes down, have anything to respond. And what if Nico hits Lost City here, Joe?
Well, Duraludon is large and in charge at this stage. We know that Patrick doesn't have the reach on 330 hit points.
And that is
Patrick
the game.
knows.
Patrick, you see the fist bump there. Nico takes a 2-0 victory. That Duraludon is just nothing Patrick can do. That's the game.
Expertly played from Nico with the Arceus Duraludon. This archetype gets a bit of stick for not having too many difficult decisions, but that's not true. The decisions are difficult. There aren't just so many of them. So you really need to be sort of weighing up how you can navigate your way through that turn. You can never really guarantee anything. You have a good amount of draw, but it's mostly supporter draw. Once you've used that star buff, there's no guarantees, so you have to be keeping different lines open. I really like the patient approach from Nico there. He knew when to pounce on using the Lost City, and he just made too big of a threat there. There wasn't even a use of Hyper Potion throughout the entire game. He never really needed those. He was in such a good position there.
You pointed out a bunch, right? It's things like not benching the Duraludon turn 1, even though you've got access, because you know it's the better play. Yep. It's attaching, do I attach the extra energy here for the Hyper Potion, or do I leave it available for future turns? When do I go for the big Parasol? What, you know, at what point do I, you know, stretch to try and get that Lost City? When do I use my boss's order to take KOs, and when do I KO what's in front of me? And you're right, there are fewer decisions to be made, but even in that game, we saw many decisions that Nico made that directly contributed to what was a fairly straightforward 2-0 victory, but it was a fairly straightforward 2-0 victory because Nico played so gosh darn well.
Especially because you're sort of learning on the job when you come up against Lost Zone Box. There's so many variations of the archetype right now that you really sort of have to figure out what's going on in their deck list. You can get hints based on what energy they're using, but of course Nico wasn't to know that there wasn't a Rayquaza in the deck list. That's often seen as a partner alongside the Raikou because the energy line up so similarly. So he was sort of playing around different game plans that weren't even existing. So there was a lot of thought going into his turns just in case there were random attackers in the Lost Zone deck.
Yeah, and that's one of the awkward things when you're playing so few Pokemon. It's, I don't want to bench my Pokemon. I want to leave this as barren as I can, but I also want to make sure I'm not falling into a trap. I mean, we've seen before where people are like, I'll pass 1 Pokemon, it will be fine, and it was not fine.
Yeah.
But especially, I mean, game 2, like you say, it was a much easier decision, game 2, because you've looked at the deck and you've basically discovered, okay, so the big threat, so to speak, is the Raikou. That's what this deck is built around. And certainly in things like the Mirror, Raikou's a way better option against these smaller decks, but against something like Arceus, Duraludon, there were so many turns where just, I mean, I keep saying we want to see this Dragonite attack. That was a game where actually there were multiple turns where a big Dragonite could have been the difference. Yeah,
Dragonite, it's no surprise that it's seen such a good amount of play in these builds, but typically that's alongside the War Strategy, and that's just a different way of playing this archetype. We initially saw Raikou alongside the Rayquaza, but people have adapted towards the Zamazenta instead, and in this case it really helps out the Arceus Duraludon players.
Absolutely, but you don't want to hear us talking about how Nico won the game. You want to hear Nico talking about how Nico won the game. So let's go and hear from our round 2 winner.
Welcome everyone. I'm here obviously with our feature match winner, Nico Alibas. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's been going pretty well so far. And
yeah, I mean, what looks like a very convincing win for your deck, a 2-0 against a Lost Box. You chose to play Arceus Duraludon. Love to get a bit of your thinking of why you decided to go with this deck, because it's not something I typically see you go with.
Yeah, so basically, for the entire format, I've just been playing Lost Box, and obviously I've also been testing stuff like Mew, stuff like Lugia, outside of tournaments, and especially in the last couple of tournaments, the biggest issue was to finish games, because Lost Box, obviously, I mean, as we could see on stream, is like a super slow deck, especially considering that in game 1 Patrick wasn't even doing super hot, but when he asked, like when he was scooping, he asked the judge, okay, how much time do we have left? Was like 27 minutes left, so half the round gone without anything really happening. And that was basically my experience in the last couple of tournaments. So I just had a lot of ties, a lot of games where I lost game 1 and then had to like maybe try to win 2 games afterwards. So I was like, okay, it's the last event of the format,
yeah.
and we've been playing this format for like 6 months. So why not just play something super chill? Because like, especially in the last week, I've been mostly just doing other stuff, university stuff especially.
Yeah, okay.
So I just figured, okay, just go with a deck where I'm confident I can play it well enough without having too much practice, and that's how I ended up playing Arcturalodon.
No, amazing that, and we can see just from you in those 2 games, taking it pretty chill. It's good to see you pretty chill and not too stressed out, and a lot of the deck choices and the different micro decisions you've had, like you said, playing Lost Box so far. You know, did you at any point find it a little bit difficult? I mean, it looked kind of scary. There was a lot of damage counters on your side of the boards, but that typically happens just from when you're facing a deck which is trying to 2-hit you. Did you go into this tournament thinking, if I hit some Lost Box matchups, you'll be generally okay? Is that was your thinking going into it?
I mean, generally, Lost Box is super fine, especially with the Lost Cities in my deck, as we could see in game 1 especially, where I just got rid of a lot of his attackers, and that's essentially what the matchup comes down to. You just try to run your Lost Box opponent out of resource, right? Like, you force them to use so many energies, so many switching cards, just to get, like, this, a little bit of a damage in, which can work out normally, because, I mean, obviously, Duraludon, for example, gives up 3 prizes. They can just 2-shot it, and Arceus also 2 prizes, they can 2-shot it. So normally it can work out for them. But then you also have stuff like the Hyper Potion in the deck that can also off-throw the math. And the reason why the game got so like close in game 2 is that I just wasn't able to get out the 3rd attacker. And normally your goal is just to go like force your opponent through 3 attackers, right? Like either 2 Arceus and 1 Duraludon, but ideally 2 Duraludon, because ideally, they have to 3-shot it. Sometimes, obviously, they can 2-shot it. But if you get them into the 3-shot window, it just swings the matchup into your favor.
Yeah. Sure.
But as you could see, sometimes with a deck like Duraludon, it has like nothing to play off the board, right? Like no Inteleon engine, no Comfys, no Radiant Greninja. It just can get rough if you don't have everything that you need in your hand.
Yeah.
Thankfully, Lost Box is a deck that doesn't really touch your hand, so you just basically get to keep, and you're like in control when you lose your hand.
Sure. Yeah, exactly that. And it's great insight because obviously you've played, as you said, a lot of Lost Box already. So it's kind of good to hear the other side because you kind of very well explained it, which is fantastic to see. Gives you great also knowledge going into that matchup as well.
Always helps.
Yeah. I mean, how's your season gone so far? I know you've got your invite now, I believe, or if not very close. You have, I think last tournament you got it.
Yeah.
Which is fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you.
We will see you in Yokohama in Japan as well.
Hopefully, yeah.
But yeah, how generally has your sort of tournaments gone so far? What are you expecting now that you're already 2-0 in Utrecht?
Yeah, so compared to my other few seasons, which obviously have been like very thankful that I was able to get like top 22, was able to win an IC and everything. This one has been pretty rough. I mean, it started off very well in Lille with a top 4, where I could have probably won that event if I don't throw on stream. So that being said,
it happens to a lot of us.
It does, it does. But yeah, then unfortunately I missed Bilbao because like a lot of players, my flight got cancelled, so that tournament I didn't get to play. And then the last couple of tournaments have been like pretty rough. Like I was able to get some amount of CP, but as I said, right, like there were a lot of ties, a lot of losses, and or like not a lot of losses, but if you're like at 3 ties, every loss is basically like multiple losses. So yeah, I barely got to my invite, but obviously I would like to be in a better spot. I would like to be in top 22. So, I mean, I hope I can try to kind of salvage my season at UIC. And so, obviously, my goal here is just to get as many CP as possible because I still want to go for the top 22 race, right? Because that payoff at the end of the season, if you make it, is just so big. So, as long as it's not fully lost, especially with our local IC still like on the horizon, I still just want to get points, as many as possible, ideally, and yeah, that's basically the goal for today.
Okay, amazing. And I mean, you're already 2-0, so it's a fantastic start. So again, thank you very much for your time, and again, congratulations on winning your feature match.
Thank you.
Good luck for the rest of the rounds.
Thank you.
What we're going to do now is take you straight over to Shay, who's going to give you a great breakdown, a little bit more insight into Arceus Duraludon.